Welcome to Today in History, our channel, where we dive daily into the most fascinating, weird, and mind-blowing events that have happened throughout time. In addition to our daily videos, we also delve into the lesser-known aspects of history, exploring the events and actions that have shaped our world. Today, we're stepping back in time to explore one of the darkest aspects of ancient Roman society, the slave markets. Slavery was a fundamental part of the Roman economy and culture, with millions of people being bought and sold throughout the empire. But what did these slave markets actually look like? How were slaves treated, and what roles did they play in Roman society? Get ready for an eye-opening journey into the ancient world. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and join us as we uncover the truth about the slave markets of ancient Rome. The importance of slavery in Roman society. Slavery in ancient Rome was not just an economic necessity, it was deeply embedded in the social and cultural fabric of Roman life. The Roman Empire, at its peak, was one of the most powerful civilizations the world has ever known, and much of that power was built on the backs of slaves. Slaves were everywhere in Rome. They worked in households, farms, mines, and even in public offices. They served as laborers, teachers, doctors, and even entertainers. For many Romans, owning slaves was a symbol of wealth and status. The more slaves one owned, the higher they were regarded in society. But where did these slaves come from? The answer lies in Rome's extensive conquests. As the Roman legions swept across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, they captured thousands, sometimes millions of people. These prisoners of war were often sold into slavery, but it wasn't just war that fueled the Roman slave markets. Piracy, kidnapping, and even the sale of unwanted children contributed to the supply of slaves. The slave markets. A glimpse into the past. The slave markets of ancient Rome were bustling, chaotic, and often brutal places. These markets were typically located in major cities like Rome, Ephesus, and Carthage, where traders, buyers, and curious onlookers would gather. Imagine walking through a Roman slave market. The air is filled with the sounds of traders haggling over prices, the cries of slaves being separated from their families, and the general buzz of commerce. Slaves were often displayed on platforms, sometimes naked, to allow potential buyers to inspect them for signs of health or defects. These inspections were invasive and degrading, with buyers poking and prodding slaves to assess their physical condition. Slaves were categorized and priced based on their age, gender, skills, and origin. For example, Greek slaves were highly valued for their education and could fetch a high price as tutors or secretaries. On the other hand, those destined for hard labor, like agricultural work or mining, were often sold in bulk and for lower prices. Prices varied widely. A young, healthy male slave could cost as much as a small farm, while an older or weaker slave might be sold for a fraction of that price. Slaves with specialized skills, like doctors or musicians, were the most expensive. The auction process. The sale of slaves was often conducted through auctions. These auctions were public events, attended by a wide range of people, from wealthy patricians to common citizens looking for domestic help. Auctioneers would shout out the qualities of the slaves on sale, highlighting their strengths and potential uses. Bidding would start at a certain price, and buyers would compete until the highest bid was reached. This was a cold and impersonal process. Slaves were treated as commodities, stripped of their humanity. In some cases, slaves were branded with the initials V or F to signify their status as verna, a homeborn slave, or fugitivus, a runaway. These marks served as a reminder of their bondage and a warning to others. The branding was a painful process, and the scars were permanent, symbolizing the inescapable nature of their condition. Before we move into the next chapter, we would like to ask you for a favor. If you are enjoying the video, please support us by subscribing to our channel, click the like button, and share the video. It means a lot to us. Thank you. Treatment of slaves in the markets. The treatment of slaves in Roman markets was harsh and often inhumane. Many were captured in violent circumstances, torn from their homes, and transported long distances under brutal conditions. By the time they reached the markets, many were already weakened by hunger, disease, or abuse. Female slaves were particularly vulnerable. They were often subjected to sexual exploitation, both during transport and after their sale. Some were purchased specifically for this purpose, while others faced sexual abuse from their masters once they were placed in households. Children were not spared from the horrors of the slave markets. They were often separated from their parents and sold to different buyers. Young boys might be trained for specialized roles, like scribes or attendants, while girls were frequently sold as domestic servants or concubines. Despite this grim reality, not all slaves were destined for a life of misery. Some were bought by more compassionate masters and could eventually gain their freedom. However, these cases were exceptions rather than the rule, and the majority of slaves lived harsh, unforgiving lives. The role of slaves in Roman economy and society. Slaves were the backbone of the Roman economy. They worked in nearly every industry, from agriculture to mining to construction to domestic service. The vast estates owned by wealthy Romans, known as latifundia, were primarily staffed by slave labor. These estates produced the food and goods that fueled the Roman economy. In urban areas, slaves worked in a variety of roles. Some served as domestic servants, tending to the daily needs of their masters. Others worked in workshops, producing goods for sale. Educated slaves could be found in more specialized roles, such as tutors for wealthy children, accountants, or secretaries. The reliance on slave labor had a profound impact on Roman society. It created a stark divide between the wealthy elite, who owned the majority of the slaves, and the poor free citizens, who often struggled to compete with slave labor for jobs. This economic disparity contributed to social tensions and unrest, which would eventually play a role in the decline of the Roman Empire. Manumission and the path to freedom. Despite the harsh conditions, some slaves were able to gain their freedom, a process known as manumission. Manumission could be granted in several ways. Some slaves were able to buy their freedom if they had saved enough money. Others were freed as a reward for loyalty or exceptional service. In some cases, a master might free a slave as an act of benevolence or as part of their will. Once freed, former slaves, known as freedmen or liberty, had a unique status in Roman society. They were not considered full citizens, but enjoyed more rights than slaves. They could own property, marry, and in some cases, pass on their status to their children. However, freedmen often remained economically and socially dependent on their former masters, who became their patrons. The possibility of manumission provided some hope for slaves, but it also served as a tool for control. Masters could use the promise of freedom to incentivize obedience and hard work, while the threat of denying manumission could be used to enforce discipline. The decline of slavery in the Roman Empire. Slavery remained a central institution throughout most of the Roman Empire's history, but its prominence began to decline in the later years of the empire. Several factors contributed to this decline. First, the supply of new slaves decreased as the empire's expansion slowed. With fewer conquests, the flow of prisoners of war into the slave markets diminished. This led to a scarcity of slaves and increased their cost, making them less economically viable for many Roman citizens. Second, the rise of Christianity began to change attitudes towards slavery. Although early Christianity did not outright condemn slavery, it did emphasize the spiritual equality of all people. Over time, this contributed to a gradual shift in attitudes, with more emphasis placed on the humane treatment of slaves and the value of manumission. Finally, economic changes played a significant role. The Roman economy began to shift away from large-scale agriculture towards smaller, more specialized industries. This reduced the demand for mass slave labor. Additionally, the increasing prevalence of free tenant farmers, known as colony, began to replace slaves on many estates. By the time of the fall of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century CE, slavery was still present, but no longer the dominant economic force it had once been. Over the subsequent centuries, slavery would continue to decline in Europe, eventually being replaced by serfdom and other forms of labor. The legacy of Roman slavery. The legacy of slavery in ancient Rome is profound and far-reaching. The Roman institution of slavery influenced the development of later European societies, particularly in the way that slavery was justified and practiced. The legal frameworks and social attitudes established during the Roman era continued to shape the institution of slavery in later centuries, including during the transatlantic slave trade. The brutal reality of Roman slavery also serves as a reminder of the human capacity for exploitation and cruelty. While the Roman Empire achieved great cultural and technological advancements, these were built in part on the suffering of millions of enslaved people. Understanding this dark chapter of history is crucial for acknowledging the full scope of the Roman Empire's legacy. That brings us to the end of the video. The slave markets of ancient Rome were places of cruelty, exploitation, and human suffering, yet they were also an integral part of the Roman economy and society. By examining these markets, we gain a deeper understanding of the complexities of Roman civilization and the ways in which power, wealth, and oppression were intertwined. As we reflect on this history, it's important to remember the millions of lives that were affected by the institution of slavery in Rome. Their stories are a vital part of our shared human history, and acknowledging their experiences helps us to better and fully understand the impact of ancient civilizations on our modern world. If you found this exploration into the Roman slave markets intriguing, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the untold stories of history. Let us know in the comments what other aspects of ancient civilizations you'd like us to explore. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.